in the latest fight against Saddam Hussein. You're not going to see these coalition members sending troops to the region, staging in Kuwait, as we've seen before. You'll see continued U.S. airstrikes. You might see airstrikes from some other members of the coalition, but far more likely, I think, among the Arab Gulf members of this coalition will be an effort to restrict Islamic State financing, some more intelligence sharing, some diplomatic pressure on actors in the region, and perhaps an opportunity to try to look at the instability inside Syria itself, where, of course, the Islamic State threat initially grew.
You know, talking about Russia, the situation is a bit tricky. Russia has consistently denied its involvement in Ukraine in spite of all of the irrefutable proof that, you know, we have seen over the past few weeks. It has instead called for peace talks. What do you make of this seemingly or alleged double standard by Russia?
Well, President Putin and his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, yes, have certainly portrayed themselves as bystanders in the Ukrainian crisis. And as you say, I think that's something that most people don't believe. Unfortunately, approaching it from that construct means that President Putin can say, as he has said, that he need not be part of the ceasefire to end the conflict in Ukraine because he's not a party to the conflict. Well, of course, the Russians are a party to the conflict, and there can be no solution to the violence in these eastern provinces without bringing Russia on board. But Russia is feeling some of the impact of the sanctions that are already in place. European Union leaders are talking about increasing those sanctions in response to the latest, more direct Russian assault across the border to secure some of the areas approaching what is already the Russian enclave in Crimea. So despite the reality on the ground and what the Russians have to say about their involvement there, it is clear that whether this is a construct through NATO or whether this is a construct through the United States and some of its European allies who have imposed sanctions, Russia has to be part of the solution.
Finally, Scott, NATO is faced with a dilemma in Afghanistan, and you would agree with me. I mean, saying it is due to hand over to Afghanistan military in the coming months. Do you think the country can handle its own security, bearing in mind that it is still yet to elect a new government?
That's a very difficult question and is no doubt facing NATO leaders at this summit. Some of the Afghan forces that have been stood up by ISAF have shown themselves to be pretty competent. Other forces in other Afghan security forces, not so much. As you know, the hope initially was to have the new Afghan president at this NATO summit in Wales. We're still a long way from having a new Afghan president as the vote counting there, the auditing of the presidential vote continues with some acrimony between the two men who are the contestants there. That is really a serious question. When is Afghanistan going to have a new president, and how are they going to move forward on their own security? One thing we do know, the ISAF force in Afghanistan that is largely stood up through NATO will be leaving at the end of the year. What will replace that? The United States says that it is willing to leave some U.S. troops, about 3,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan after the departure of the ISAF force, but must have in place before it agrees to that a bilateral security agreement. The Obama administration initially wanted that signed at the beginning of this year, but the outgoing Afghan president refused to do that, saying it would be up to the new Afghan president. The fact that there is no new Afghan president means there is no bilateral security agreement and no conditions under which at present Afghanistan can negotiate with the United States to leave some troops there in an advisory capacity to help Afghan forces stand up and take responsibility for their own security.
Scott Stearns from Washington, D.C., thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts on the program. Let's take you on a short break. When we come back, we'll take a look at other stories. The World Health Organization convenes a meeting of medical experts in Geneva to find a promising solution to the Ebola virus disease. To join us again. Back, you're watching The World Today on Channels Television, reaching you live from Lagos, Nigeria. Let's take a look at some other stories now. It's the first time since the family of U.S. journalist Steven Sotloff have spoken publicly since a video of his beheading was released by Islamic State militants. They said that the reporter gave his life to covering the suffering of people in war zones, but didn't see himself as a hero. Vice President Joe Biden gave an assurance that the IS militants who perpetrated this crime would be brought to justice. U.S. President Barack Obama also paid tribute to Mr. Sotloff and vowed that the U.S. would not be intimidated following the release of his murder in a videotape by the terrorists.
The mother of James Foley empathized with the family of Steven Sotloff on Wednesday, September the 3rd, after Islamic State released a video showing the beheading of the U.S. journalist, weeks after a video showing Foley's death was released.
We send all of our love and hugs to them. Unfortunately, they're sharing the pain we are. So we just ask the world to embrace them as the world has embraced us. It's helped us so much.
U.S. journalist James Foley, who was abducted in Syria in late 2012, was beheaded by a masked member of the Islamic State group in an act filmed in a video released on August 19, in which the masked man also threatened a second American hostage, Sotloff. Foley asked for prayer and support to free the remaining captives held throughout the world.
And we appeal to the international community to protect the remaining hostages throughout the world. I mean, there are many innocent people held captive around the world. So we just pray that we can come together and help them be free.
Indeed, steps are being taken to free those being held captive, but that will not include paying ransoms demanded by the extremists.
I'm sure that the whole House and the whole country will join with me in condemning the sickening and brutal murder of another American hostage and share our shock and anger that it again appears to have been carried out by a British citizen. All our thoughts are with the British hostage and his family. Their ordeal is unimaginable. But let me be very clear, this country will never give in to terrorism. Our opposition to ISIL will continue at home and abroad. A country like ours will not be cowed by these barbaric killers. If they think that we will weaken in the face of their threats, they are wrong. It will have the opposite effect. We will be more forthright in the defense of the values, liberty under the rule of law, freedom, democracy that we hold dear.
Sotloff's death, along with that of journalist James Foley, has prompted calls for more action by the U.S. government. Based on that, NATO Chief Anders Rasmussen has re-emphasized that it is the responsibility of the entire international community to assist Iraq.
I do believe the international community as a whole has an obligation to stop the Islamic State from advancing further.
For now, all that's been kept alive are memories of Sotloff as students at his alma mater remembered the journalist during a vigil. The late Steven Sotloff was just 31 years old. The U.S. plans to send officials to the Middle East to work with regional partners on ways to battle Islamic State.
In other news, the World Health Organization is meeting in Geneva to examine the most promising treatment for the Ebola virus disease, which has claimed more than 1,900 people in West Africa since the outbreak. There have been 3,500 confirmed or probable cases in Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia. WHO Chief Margaret Chan said the outbreaks are racing ahead of the control efforts in these countries. Well, she said that disease control experts, medical researchers, officials from affected countries, and specialists in medical ethics are meeting in Geneva to develop a plan of action for the implementation of experimental treatments. At least $600 million are needed to fight the virus, and more than 20,000 people could be infected before the outbreak is brought under control according to the World Health Organization. Well, joining us now to discuss further on this matter is VOA's Carol Persing from Washington, D.C. Thanks a lot, Carol, for joining us on the program.
You're more than welcome.
Now, Carol, what more do we know about this plan for experimental procedures for the Ebola virus disease treatment?
Well, the scientists are meeting today and tomorrow in Geneva, and they're going to evaluate all the vaccines that show any kind of promise, all the treatments that show any kind of promise, and then they're going to select those that they think should be fast-tracked so that it might be able to get to people on the ground and help contain the virus. But there's no guarantee that even if something has worked in monkeys, which is usually where these vaccines and treatments are tested, that it will work in humans as well. So these are some of the things that need to be decided. Are they safe, especially for vaccines? Are they safe? Because vaccines are given to healthy people. Emergency or experimental treatments are given to those who are sick. But you still want to find out, does it make someone better or does it cause harm?
Well, that's a very important point you've raised. What is the status of the ZMapp at this point, as it is being administered to, the Americans that were infected with the virus?
It's apparently a lengthy development process. The company that developed ZMapp has only about 9 employees. It's very, very small. It doesn't have the capacity to gear up, and so they're trying to find ways of gearing up ZMapp. Once they gear it up and make it available, that there have to be some controls. It has to be given to people that they can follow to see, does it do some good? Does it make situations worse? And so these patients would have to have informed consent if they were taking this experimental drug.
Well, President Obama sent his own message to West Africa on Ebola. What more does the U.S. plan to do to help rein in Ebola?
Dr. Margaret Chan from the WHO is in Washington with a part of her delegation and high-level officials, doctors who are in charge of the Ebola outbreak or trying to stem that. They're meeting with World Bank officials. They're meeting with U.S. government officials. Dr. Chan said yesterday at a news conference that the U.S. has done a lot, but it has a large capacity and could do a lot more, along with other countries as well that are developed. They estimate they need many more doctors. They need some 200 plus technical advisors, and they need more protective gear. Yesterday at a news conference, she talked about a number of things that have to be done, and it includes food delivery and to areas that have been affected or cordoned off, and ending the stigma about having Ebola, so people will be able to come forth and get treated.
Now, should we not have a cure soon? How bad can it get before it gets better?
The World Health Organization estimates that about 20,000 people will get the disease before the epidemic ends. A lot of people, you've got about a 50% chance of survival. Your chances, of course, get better if you go into treatment early.
VOA's Carol Persing from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. We'll take a short break now. When we come back, we'll take you to, we were going to take you to Spain for the La Tomatina Festival, but my producer just told me now that we have to close. Anyway, that's where we'll draw the curtain on the program today. Thanks a lot for being a part of it. I am Adeshawa Josh.